Hello, welcome to another presentation from Practive Security. My name is Matt Johnston. I greatly appreciate you being here and giving me your attention and your time. That is immensely important to me, and so I very much thank you. We have a lot to cover in this presentation, which you are here to review Security Essentials for Parents, which is a presentation we've put together to cover a lot of topics regarding digital health and cybersecurity, all as it pertains to parents and raising our kids in this digital age, and really making sure that we are all equipped with understanding the problems that we face in this current state of things, as well as understanding what strategies that we can bring to bear in order to address those issues. So we do have a lot to cover. This presentation was compiled in the fall of 2025. I think that's important to note because things do change so rapidly in our world. I do want to kind of give you a little bit of orientation as to when this was content was put together, because things are always changing. There's always more we can say on these topics. There is always nuances that are cropping up that we need to also account for. But anyway, just for context's sake, that's when I compiled this presentation and have prepared it for you. But in terms of agenda, I'll give you a brief introduction into Practive Security, what we're all about, who I am as the leader of Practive Security, and then we'll dive into this presentation. We're going to talk about the problems of digital health overall and cybercrime, both what issues you are probably already aware of and thinking about as a parent, as well as some issues that I think we are completely missing and not really considering that are also important. We need to bring into our overall strategy of parenting in this digital age. And then we're going to dive deep into those issues. We're going to explore kind of the underlying current that is driving a lot of what we're seeing on the surface in terms of symptoms. So we're going to take a deep dive into understand these issues in a more concrete and deeper way, and rethink and reset some of our expectations, make sure we really are grounded around the right, I'll say, core values before we can try to attempt to solve them, address them with strategies and tactics that I will also share with you to bring to bear against each of the, I'll call them, categories of issues that we're going to be facing. So some first principles we're going to explore to help ground us in truth and ground us in priorities and ground us in a value set that will be the foundation that we bring to bear as parents. And then to recapture kind of what that vision is going to be. What does it look like to be a parent who is actively participating in managing the digital health and cybersecurity of our kids in this age, in this era? It's kind of a call to action, if you will, for us as parents. And then we'll wrap things up with, what do we do about all this? Because there's a lot to talk about. Hopefully, I will step you through this appropriately and not overwhelm you with too much information. But we will wrap this up with some key strategies to help you walk away with some things that you can effectively go do or start doing today, incorporating into life today. But what I really want to spend the majority of our time focusing on is mindset. I really want to make sure we understand the issues that we face at a deep level so that we can bring different strategies into our spheres. I recognize that each family is different. You have nuances and priorities in your home and in your context. There are variables that I'm not aware of and can't account for. And so what I'm going to try to do is give you, again, a deeper understanding of what's going on, give you some tips in terms of how I think you can deal with these sorts of issues in a tactical layer every day of your life. But really, I want to mostly prepare you to be able to make those decisions for yourself and take an active role in the defense of your kids, understanding what the issues are. And so that's kind of how we'll wrap things up. Again, with that caveat that I expect that you'll take these things home, consider them, think about them, and then integrate this into your life in a way that makes most sense. And then I will provide you a link at the very end of this to where you can find more. I have written a lot of articles on these topics. That I've done a lot of research. I have 25 years of experience working in this space professionally to back a lot of my experience and perspective and the data that I'm going to be presenting to you. And so I'll also give you some reference to that material because there's a lot more that we can talk about. I'm trying to summarize a lot for you for the sake of arming you with resources. But of course, this topic in this conversation can go on and on and on. So I'll provide you a list of resources if you want to learn more, dive deeper into these topics in your own time, and then how to see when we publish new content, new articles that I think are worthy of your attention regarding parenting overall. Which brings me to the next thing I want to draw your attention to. On practivesecurity.com, our website, for those of you who are members, we do have a page that's dedicated to parents. A lot of the things we're going to talk about are already written about there. We do have long articles, podcasts, as well as some videos and presentations already on the website regarding the things we're going to talk about in this presentation. So take a look at that page if you are a member to practivesecurity.com. All of that content is already pre-organized and ready for you as a parent to take action on. If you are a member through Substack, all of the same content for the most part is there on Substack. It's not a complete replication of our library of what's available on our website. It is not entirely the same thing, although there's a lot of similar content. So when I give you a reference list later on at the end of this presentation to all of our other topics, you can also find them on Substack and Spotify for the most part. But really the best place to consume all this is our parents page on proactivesecurity.com, and you can sign up for membership there today if you'd like, or anytime throughout the course of this presentation. All right. And then finally, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to me. This is my email address. You can take a look at that and contact me whenever you want. If you are a member, you already have my email address and know how to contact me. But I would love to hear from you. Tell me what worked well from this seminar, what you found helpful, beneficial. If you've got any thoughts that challenge what I'm about to share with you, I'd love to hear that as well. I'm constantly trying to learn and grow myself. So I'm open to feedback. I'm open to learning about things that you're experiencing in your own perspective and context. And then certainly if you have questions or want to dive in deeper into a particular topic area, I'd love to hear from you. Just know that a lot of times if you do have an interesting question that I think is worth spending some time to really think about, I might turn that into a blog or an FAQ article in and of itself. I will, of course, not mention you unless you want to be mentioned in the article. But I do also learn from what people share with me, the questions people ask, and that endeavor of thinking about those things does provoke new ideas and new understanding in me, and I turn that into insights that I want to share with others. So all that to say, questions or comments, you can send them to me at that email address, and I'd be happy to respond as soon as I can. All right. So what we're going to do in terms of presentation style for this seminar, I'm going to break this up into chunks. We do have this agenda is basically the structure we're going to follow. We're going to pause partway through each of these sections to make sure you've got a chance to catch your breath. Take a break if you'd like to, and then we'll kind of continue to march through. I will be repeating some themes as we go from one section to the next in case you missed a session or in case you needed to step away for some period of time. So don't worry, you're not going to miss anything. And of course, this is recorded, so you can always go back and review any content that you would like to later on if that makes sense for you. All right, without further ado, let's get into it. Digital health and security concerns. What I'm going to do is actually hide my face. You've got full uh, full visual of the slide deck and the presentation material so that I am not obscuring your view. And then when it's pertinent, I'll pop my head back in so you can see my smiling face or my scouring face, depending on what the context will be. But let's go ahead and get into it. So I want to talk to you first about kind of setting the stage. Let's explore the problems. What does it mean when we talk about digital health overall for our kids? What are the concerns that parents have? What are the problems that we're facing? And what are the security concerns that I think are there but a lot of people miss and don't necessarily understand or don't realize are there, but are just generally missing from the conversation. So leading into this presentation, as I mentioned before, I've been doing a lot of research over a long time. I've been reading a lot of summaries of concerns that parents have, a lot of polls about digital health and other concerns. Obviously, have 25 years of experience working in this space professionally, so I know the threats well. I know the technology space well. My experience professionally kind of grew up in the age of the digital era, if you will, and so I know how the platforms work. I know how the industry works. I know how a lot of this plays out. But I've been doing a lot of research and trying to capture and encapsulate what are the themes that people, mostly parents, are concerned about. What are the different experts in this field talking about? What sorts of solutions are they proposing? What sorts of framing do we see from the experts who are trying to help guide us through all of this? How do they see these problems? And then really, I'm trying to also highlight for you all what I think is really missing and how do we contextualize security. So I'm kind of splitting this initial section into two parts. One is the digital health issue, which I think a lot of you are primarily concerned about. And second to that is going to be the security concerns that I have that I think we should also be paying attention to. Okay, so I'm drawing off of one primary poll to summarize the top health concerns that are out there among parents. I've read multiple polls and surveys on this from different organizations and trying to encapsulate this problem. They pretty much all say the same thing, although in a slightly different order. The Mott poll report of 2025 seems to be the most recent that I could find that seems to be a good source. But also seems to echo, I think, in a good summary, the other reports that I read as well. So what the Mott poll report has to say about top health concerns of parents is essentially gave us a top 10 list of things that parents are concerned about. For those of you who are curious, this is coming at the topic from a digital health perspective, but also from a health care perspective, right? So caring for children and the issues that children are dealing with today growing up in this digital world. So the top 10 list is represented here. I collapsed some of the items that are related, and I think you'll see why that's so into basically a top seven, because some of these are repetitive on their top 10 in terms of at least the nature of the concern. But here they are. Number one on seems that on all parents' mind, number one is social media and the influence of social media and it's having on their kids. Number one concern that I think, if not number one, it is in the top three or four for certain across the different surveys and summaries and reports that I've read. Number two is screen time. So parents are concerned that their kids are spending too much time on devices, directly related to social media often, but kind of a separate topic altogether. I do want to address it separately because there's some things about screen time that I think get muddied because we misunderstand the issue. So we'll talk about that. But really the core issue here that parents seem to be concerned about is their kids using devices too much, being too consumed by their devices and device time. Number three is internet safety. This is a tricky one to encapsulate because it can mean lots of things. So I'm going to extrapolate out a little bit about this. This is where I think cybersecurity traditionally has a core has core meaning in this overall list, but we'll dive into that. It's kind of a difficult thing to really understand what parents mean here by internet safety, but I think it means a few things. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But data theft is certainly one of those, but also things related to physical health, which would be things like trafficking, human trafficking, and also kidnapping and things that are related to internet, but related to personal health and safety. Number four, diet, physical health. So what's interesting about this is on the Mott list, concerns numbers 4, 6, and 7 were all basically related to the physical health of teens and kids growing up in this digital age as it relates to technology. So the effect that technology is having on the overall physical well-being of kids, not their mental health. Mental health is number 5 on their list, but the physical health. So kids not eating well, not getting enough the proper diet, not getting enough exercise, and having other sleep-related issues. They kind of captured all of those as separate categories, but I'm going to bundle them up as into one because they all speak to kind of the physical impact or ramifications of technology use amongst our kids and how it deals with, kind of just the personal wellness of our bodies. Number 5, I just mentioned briefly. Mental health is a top concern of parents, rightfully so. We'll talk about this quite a bit. Personally, I think this is probably would be number 1 if I were to rank these. I think that would be my number 1 concern, and we'll dive into why I think that's so. Number 6, of course, bullying. This is regarding cyberbullying in particular, or people using the internet as a means to leverage or pressure each other into actions, aggressive tendencies, all that traditional bullying means, but in a digital space through technology is what parents seem to be concerned about here. And then last on the list is school violence. This is number 10. I, of course, summarized, so it's my number 7. But number 10 on the list from the Mott poll was school violence. This one varied also. This does seem to be a key theme of concern of parents. Typically, I would say the most common that I saw across all the reports were social media, screen time, violence, or just physical knowledge of where kids are physically, and the ability to engage and get to our kids or communicate to our kids as quickly as possible. And then I would say last was probably something around mental health. That didn't seem to be a big concern across all the polls, which is probably why it's number 5 on the Mott poll list. But it was certainly there. But school violence and just the general physical, I would say the ability for parents to be able to know where their kids are and to be able to communicate with them instantly in the case of some sort of physical issue is definitely one of those top concerns seems to be on the mind of parents. And it is also what's driving a lot of the I'll say technological solutions that industry is offering to parents. It's one of the kind of core 4 things that they offer, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But this seems to be what parents are mostly concerned about in this digital age as it relates to technology and its overall impact on their kids. Hopefully this resonates with you. Hopefully this does also speak to the themes that you are concerned about or are on your mind or even just have questions about, because that's what we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about, with some exceptions and some some additions from me. But looking at this from the numbers perspective, let's try to scope and understand how big of a problem this is. So, according to the Mott Poll, Pew Research, and a few other studies that I combined together to present to you these metrics, these data points, about 95% of teens in the US report that they have a smartphone or access to a smartphone. Pretty much this means that every teen in the US, with some exceptions, have access to a smartphone and can use it on a daily basis if they so choose. 92% of those who have access say that they do use their smartphone on a daily basis. And 50% of those kids said that they are online constantly. So half of our teens in the United States are under the influence of the internet on a continual basis every single day. But pretty much all of our teens have access to the internet on demand via technology that they have access to. Now, in addition to smartphones, a lot of kids, the majority of US kids, also have access to different forms of technology that still get them access to the internet in different ways, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. Okay, in terms of what kids are doing with their technology platforms, 90% of the teens surveyed say that they use their smartphone primarily for entertainment, for YouTube, for watching short videos, for watching quick videos, for watching instructional videos, for entertainment purposes, whatever the case would be. They use YouTube on a regular basis, 90% of them, and 75% of them say that they use and access, I'll call it new media, but basically online entertainment through YouTube and other related websites. 75% of them say that they engage in that activity on a daily basis. All right, in terms of artificial intelligence use, this is going to be interesting. We need to talk a lot about AI, but 75% of teens surveyed say that they access and use AI. About 33% say that they use it regularly. That number is a little bit weird. Some of the data does change depending on the survey and the source. I've seen some estimates as high as 50% of teens use AI on a regular basis, a daily basis. So the numbers are vary, but I think the main key point here is the majority of teens are using artificial intelligence. They are using AI. I think it's safe to assume that they're using it through social media, through their smartphones, since that seems to be primarily what they're engaged in online, is social media via their smartphones. And more than a quarter say that they use AI regularly. A lot of them are using AI for companionship, the AI companion story, the AI friends story, whatever you want to call it. About 1 in 3 teens surveyed said that they find conversations with their AI companions, that's their, fake friends, to be as satisfying or more satisfying than those real life friends that they have. That was according to Common Sense Media. So about 1 in 3, so 30% of teens say that their AI companions are better friends or provide them a better friendship experience than their real world human friends, human counterparts, yeah, and peers. It's an interesting statistic. We'll talk quite a bit about that more in a little bit. In terms of what kids are accessing, it's pretty obvious. It's social media, led by TikTok. So 63% of kids surveyed said that they use TikTok on a regular basis, more than half of them on a daily basis. Again, remember those kids, half of them are online constantly through their smartphone. That's what they reported, is online constantly. And then 63% of them using TikTok means that at least half of them are on TikTok on a near constant basis. Instagram was number 2 in terms of popularity amongst teens today. 61% total report that they use Instagram. 50% again say they use it daily. And then WhatsApp was the next one, with 55% total use. Oh, sorry, excuse me, Snapchat, not WhatsApp. Snapchat use 55% of teens use Snapchat daily, and so that's kind of the recurring trends. So we've got 3 primary social media platforms that are the most influential, followed by content they're consuming through YouTube or equivalent websites. So you see YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Snapchat are the most common. Facebook and X are still there. They're still being used by teens, although adoption by teens, both of Facebook and X, is waning dramatically. There hasn't really been a big adoption of X/Twitter amongst the teen population. It seems that's primarily used by adults. And kind of an increasingly niche audience, I will say. And Facebook really seems to be the legacy platform out there. It seems to be mostly what people who adopted social media a long time ago used. and either have continued to use or have kind of been stagnant there on that platform. But it is not a platform that's widely used by teens, according to the data. So just take that for what it's worth. But we'll talk into that a little bit here. But I just want to kind of first frame up the size and scale of this overall problem. Now, in terms of screen time, we talked about what kids have access to devices, obviously, what they're using those devices to access and how common. In terms of the frequency or the time spent accessing online content, according to this is a quote from Exploding Topics, another website that does research into these issues. According to their latest available data, teenagers say that they spend 7 hours and 22 minutes per day in front of screens. Now, that's not necessarily device time only, but 7.5 hours per day in front of screens would include any time that they're engaged in screen time. Although, again, 92% of kids say that they are using smartphones daily and 50% of them on a constant basis. So we can assume that at least half of the kids out there are spending something like 3 to 7 hours every single day on their smartphone. But if you add those numbers up total, and if screen time is your concern overall, kids are spending basically half their day or 43% of their waking hours looking at screens, viewing the world and getting information and building and focusing their attention on the world via screens, via technology. It is definitely at least half of the focus of their day for the average teen in the US today. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the gateway to all of this. I already mentioned these statistics, but just kind of again want to set the stage and set some context for you all. 95% of teens again say that they have smartphones that they can access. 88% say they have desktops or laptop computers, which is good to know because there's some things that we need to talk about from a threat landscape perspective that's unique to the laptop story and is not necessarily unique to the smartphone story. So it's good to know that a vast majority of teens are also using full traditional computer technology as well. 83%. So, again, the vast majority have a gaming console at home, which is another vector into the internet world. And then 70% say they have a tablet computer. So, kids have technology. They've got a lot of technology. And these are each pieces of this technology are different ways of interacting with the online world and they present different threat vectors. They present different sets of risks and also different opportunities, of course. But it's important to know how our kids are getting access to the internet so we know where to gate controls and we know where we need to make sure that we're paying attention to the problems unique to each of those avenues. Again, in terms of breakdown of what kids are using from social media, here's the numbers in the centers of the slide here. Roughly 3/4 of teens visit YouTube daily, while around 6 in 10 say this about TikTok. What's interesting to note here is take a look at not just the almost constantly numbers, but take a look at the several times a day numbers, because those are the mass majority of kids that are surveyed. So if you look at YouTube, 73% of teens said that they use YouTube at least daily. But 39% said that they use YouTube several times a day. That's interesting. So almost 40% say that they use YouTube several times a day, with 15% saying almost constantly. So when we talk about influence, we talk about gateways to influence in the online world. I think we need to put those two numbers together, probably all three of these numbers together, to say this is really a significant source of influence of our kids. And the same is true of TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat. When you look at the numbers across the total usage of these technologies and the platforms, that gives you a better sense of understanding the influence. So again, 57% of teens say that they use TikTok daily. 34% say that they're engaged in TikTok throughout the day, several times a day, 16% almost constantly, and the numbers go down from there. Now, what's interesting to note is also about spheres of influence. This is a demographic split depending on whether or not you have boys and girls at home that you're raising. But what's interesting about this last infographic, which is why I want to include it, is to show primary spheres of influence depending on if you're a boy or a girl. So girls overall seem to prefer social media. They seem to prefer TikTok as a platform when compared to other new media, i.e., in particular comparison to YouTube. Girls prefer the social media route for consuming content and engaging online. Versus boys seem to prefer YouTube. So more video content, less interactive. Although, of course, I do consider YouTube a social media platform because it is new media content presented by anyone with the ability to interact with the content author and others in a social way via comments. And then, of course, you can you can post reply videos, and all that happens on YouTube. You know what the story is there. But these are two different ways that kids are engaging the technology, which does speak to some influence. It does speak to some perspectives, and it's good to know when we talk about strategies. In terms of Snapchat, Instagram, and Facebook, again, it's kind of mixed results, pretty much the same. But there is definitely a big split between TikTok and YouTube, which I think does speak to primary influences and the primary ways that our kids are looking to be influenced by online content. All right. So, what does this mean? What are some of the numbers that describe what kind of mental health crisis or meaning crisis are we in based on this excessive technology use? I think it's safe to say that this use is pretty excessive, especially amongst developing minds who are supposed to be focused on other things. They are consumed and under the influence of technology. So, what's the effect of all this in terms of what we can measure? Well, of course, depression is a major issue amongst U.S. teens. 40% of U.S. teens, so these are students in the ninth to 10th to 12th grade range, as of 2023, reported symptoms of depression. 40% of U.S. teens. Most recent polling puts this number higher. It's kind of hard to decipher exactly, as metrics always are. Different reports vary, but I thought this was a kind of a conservative estimate, and it is prior to the last 2 years. We have seen a significant spike in signs of depression, symptoms of depression, mentions of depression and meaningless in our youth over the last couple years. So I think it's safe to say that more than 40%, probably at least 50% of US teens are showing symptoms or expressing that they feel depressed. And this is up from 26% in 2009. I thought that 2009 metric was important to bring into you to present to you kind of a context shift between the pre COVID era and the post COVID era that we're in. Pre COVID era, a quarter of teens were wrestling with depression in some way, which we know teenage years are already a difficult time for development. There's a lot going on in teens, and so that's already kind of a concern we've had. But since the COVID era and all the technology kind of emphasis that's happened since then, we're up to 40%, perhaps 50%. I found a survey that talked about this in the context of the UK and of Europe overall. But in the UK, as of 2025, this is a much more recent metric. But in the UK, teens or people, I should say, in the range of 16 years old to 29 years old, those who are heavily under social influence from social media platforms primarily, 89% of them reported that, quote, life has no meaning. 89% of 16 to 29-year-olds in the UK say in 2025 that life has no meaning. And so when we talk about the scale and scope of depression amongst our younger generation who is heavily under the influence of these platforms and of the technology. I think we need to contextualize this to say it is probably the majority experience of our youth and young adults. It's probably the majority of our youth are wrestling with depression, who are also immersed deeply in this technology space. Now, there are some other mixed perspectives on this. Parents who were surveyed about depression and signs of depression in their teens, 80% of parents said that they feel that their kids are disconnected and are getting worse. Those are disconnected is a good sign of depression or some form of detachment, which can lead to depression. But the mass majority of parents say that their kids are detached or they're disconnected, and it seems to be getting worse compared to teens surveyed by the same in the same poll. 50% of teens said that their screen time was about right, so they don't really necessarily see a problem or correlation. But 43% of teens did say that their social media is too much. Now, kind of an interesting side note on this, I was reading a report just this morning that talked about the trend of schools implementing no phone or no smartphone phone times, whether it's the entire school day or for parts of the day. What's interesting about that is the students who are in those contexts are reporting positive results. They seem to like the experience of being forced to put their smartphone away, to not have access to it, to be forced into in classroom engagement and peer engagement and real human engagement in real world contexts, and a more cooperative experience, a more social experience at school. So that's interesting. I think that would support the 42% say that there's too much social media use, or that they're using social media too much, because there is a trend in schools that are adopting a no technology stance, or at least a no smartphone stance. There is a trend that correlates to the students in those contexts saying that that is a better overall daily experience for them. So again, mixed perspectives on on whether or not screen time and technology use is a correlation to depression and how kids view that versus parents. And that's going to speak to how receptive kids are going to be to any sort of change that we're going to try to implement. But it also speaks to the fact that the majority of kids see no problem. They see no correlation between their technology use and potential mental health crisis and meaning crisis that they are obviously in the midst of. Okay, so some of the most dire statistics that we can come up with, of course, are going to be things that impact the soul and the body permanently. So, suicide 20% of US teens say they have seriously considered suicide in recent years. 20%, which is a startling number. Again, almost a quarter of the population. Considering suicide used to be a very small fraction or percentage of the population, especially amongst kids, even the kids who are struggling with growing up through their teenage years. But this number is off the charts from a historical perspective. 20% have seriously considered suicide, not just self harm, but seriously considered suicide. The same report cited that emergency room visits due to self harm have doubled since 2009, and this again was as of 2023. So if we take into account the more recent polls and the most recent data, these numbers are probably higher. I just don't have those figures to present to you today. But emergency room visits due to self harm are doubled since 2009, and 20%, almost a quarter of our teens, say that they have seriously considered suicide in recent years. Now, what's interesting about this, the top cited causes of mental illness or mental health issues, and this is in terms of different reports that have studied this, as well as self-reporting from parents and teens. But the top cited causes for this mental health crisis are social media. People are universally pointing to social media and saying this is a negative influence of us. Isolation, which I think speaks to screen time, but the reason kids are going to screen time is primarily for entertainment and for social media purposes. So those two are related. But the third criteria that was often cited in reports is depressing our kids is global events, which again, that is also tied to screen time. If kids are consuming content on social media and new media, through an isolated lens, they're off by themselves on their device, consuming what the world is telling them via the internet and via their device. That's going to expose them to a lot of the churn and constant flood of the latest crisis that we always see in the media and from different reporting organizations, which is going to make them more aware and more stressed out about global events. But all of this, they are saying, points to a generation that is burned out and disengaged, which I think you would agree that you see that all over the place. If you see any group of teens around town, most likely they are sitting together in a clump, all staring at their phones together, and they're just generally disengaging from life, and that is a big problem that we're seeing. Interestingly, also the traditional causes for depression and suicide, those are down from a statistical perspective. And some of those traditional causes are citing drug abuse, family dynamics like divorce and other things that happen in the home, and then a turning away from the faith. Those are traditional causes that lead to depression. So kind of your foundational belief system, your core living context, and then drug abuse. Those typically lead to depression in teens and then to suicide. Those are all trending down in recent years. Trending up, of course, are the other things we've already talked about. So all of this does paint the picture that, yeah, our kids are in a state of mental distress. There is definitely a situation of mental health and a meaning crisis that is going on amongst our youth and young adults today. The population of our country who are primarily under the influence of technology at the rate and extent that they are. Hopefully this is all making sense to you so far. Okay, I'm going to read this quote to you. I've got a few quotes that I do want to read to you over a couple slides. I apologize, but I think this is really important, and so I want to provide this for you by way of reference, but also just bring this quote directly to you. So this is from a report by the National Institute of Health titled "The Impact of Digital Devices." And this is what they had to say as a summary of deep analysis that they performed. So they said that digital devices impact children's daily lives by forcing prolonged inactivity, and internet addiction has been linked to anxiety, depression, and eating disorders in middle and late childhood. So if you just pause for a second, if you remember back that original slide I put up where the Mott poll cited different concerns of parents related to devices, you can see how these are directly related to the NIH's study of how digital devices are affecting kids. All right, continuing on. Similar effects have been linked to the hikikomori condition, Hikikimura, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I'll keep going. Characterized by severe social isolation during childhood, particularly in this context, the anxiety and depression symptoms are worsened by virtual interactions and digital communication, which in turn increase social withdrawal. So, the more kids are engaged in virtual interactions and digital forms of communication, that increases their isolation and their anxiety and their overall withdrawal from participation in life. Prolonged sitting time or time spent on non exercise activities is associated with a higher risk of cardiovascular and metabolic diseases. In contrast, physical activity helps reduce overweight, obesity, and related health risks. All right, so this is basically affirming what parents say that they're most concerned about from a National Institute of Health perspective, correlating the use of digital devices to all of the things that I just described to you are core problems that our teens and our youth today are experiencing: inactivity, internet addiction, anxiety and depression, eating disorders, social isolation, anxiety, depression again, worsened virtual interactions, worsening their withdrawal state, higher risk of physical disease and issues with their bodies. And finally, the report said additionally, childhood lifestyle choices affect health in adulthood. This is super important. The precedent and the patterns that our kids are establishing for themselves today do set them up for what they're going to carry into adulthood and into the future of their lives. So it's really important that we address these issues early on and get them set up with the right patterns and the right course of life so that they can thrive as adults. But additionally, childhood lifestyle choices affect health in adulthood and are influenced by various factors. In particular, an umbrella systematic literature review on behavioral determinants demonstrated that screen use was negatively associated with moderate to vigorous physical activity, whilst previous physical activity and independent mobility and active transport were positively associated with overall physical activity in children. So, again, setting up the precedent for what kids are doing in childhood sets their pattern for adulthood overall. And it links, again, screen time, addiction to the internet, etc., to an overall unhealthy state as kids. Okay. Net Psychology, this is a good source. They had a great article. And the reason I'm bringing this up is it does speak to other issues and themes of other thinkers that I respect deeply. The psychology world is a mixed bag for me personally, but I think this encapsulates this issue really well. And again, it does support and link some other reporting I'm going to share with you here in a minute. But on the topic of rewiring our brains, this is a topic that a lot of big thinkers are becoming increasingly aware of and drawing our attention to. Ian McGilchrist, who is a Christian who works in the neurosciences, is heavily addressing this issue or drawing our attention to this issue overall. We're going to hear from him and his perspective here in a minute or two. But this is a big topic that I want to also bring to your attention and just point out that mainstream and big sources that people are going to be going to for knowledge and for truth are also affirming these same concerns. So here's what they had to say about rewiring our brains. TikTok attention span, which is a kind of a symptom or kind of a thing that they're describing as a new phenomenon, TikTok attention span, isn't just shrinking, it's fundamentally transforming how we process information, make decisions, and relate to the world around us. This is a really, really important theme. It speaks to a lot of what Dr. Ian McGilchrist is trying to teach us about attention and how what we pay attention to not only influences us and gives life to what we are paying attention to, but it also transforms how our brains work, the nature of attending to something, how we pay attention, how we think about things, and the format and structure of what we're paying attention to actually trains our brain and strengthens our brain, or it diminishes different capacities we have naturally to be able to perceive deeper truths and deeper meanings. And so net psychology is basically affirming what Dr. Ian McGilchrist is saying here and saying there is a correlation between short attention spans and rapid decision making or rapid exposure to short, quick themed presentations of content, if you will, the TikTok feed syndrome. There's a direct correlation between that and how we process information and then how we understand how to interact with the world around us. So if we compare that nugget of knowledge with what I've just shared with you in terms of statistics, you can see this correlation between the more time kids spend engaging in social platforms, particularly those like TikTok, the less they are going to be able to know how to relate with the world around them, and the less they will be able to function with the world around them, which is probably what's creating that contributing to the creation of that isolation and that detachment that we've noted before. Net Psychology went on to say this. The same article said, "Here's something that keeps me up at night. What happens to human creativity when we can't sustain attention long enough to create anything complex?" This is also going to be exacerbated by the AI problem. But what they're pointing out here is if we're rewiring our brains in this TikTok attention span way of processing information, what's going to suffer is deeper thinking, creative thinking, larger context processing, and we're going to lose the ability to express and interpret and understand deeper meanings from things, which is a phenomenon that we're already seeing. Writing a novel, composing a symphony, conducting original research, or organizing a social movement all require extended periods of deep focus. If an entire generation is growing up with fragmented attention spans, we risk losing not just individual cognitive capacity, but our collective ability to produce the kind of cultural and intellectual work that moves humanity forward. I want to draw this to your attention because there's a lot of the solutions that I see in industry that are geared towards parents or created for parents to use to help address screen time technology use in the mental health crisis. A lot of that is focused on managing and moderating content. But what this is essentially saying to us is it's not just the content, it's the structure in which the content is being relayed to us. And it's not just a matter of being exposed to themes that are making you sad or being exposed to negative influences that are affecting what you're thinking about. It's also the phenomenon, the platform itself is actually training our brains to work differently, to training our brains to work in a way that prevents us from actually interacting with the larger world around us. And that, of course, is a huge, huge issue. So that leads us to another issue that we need to be concerned about, and that's the addiction and attention crisis that is unfolding from these platforms. American Psychological Association said the more time exposed to short form content, that's the TikTok time span kind of a thing, or the any kind of feed from social media, really, the more time exposed to that sort of content, that sort of feed ingestion of stuff, the more teens struggle with attention, self-control, stress, and anxiety. So again, it's not just the content, it's also the platform, the feeds, the shorts, and the sound bites. With that kind of constant feed of attention grabbing stuff, you basically have something like 15 seconds to watch a piece of content for your brain to make some sort of contextual decision about that, whether it's important or not, whether to prioritize it or not, whether to think about it or not, whether it's a moral thing or not, and to move on. You've like this rapid process of ingest, decide, ingest, decide, ingest, decide. And Baylor University had this to say about this entire phenomenon from a study that they conducted. They said, quote, "The study found that TikTok's technological affordances indirectly increase addiction by first increasing engagement. The more users engage, the more likely they are to lose track of time, a phenomenon known as time distortion." David, the author of the report, said this design is no accident. Quote, "TikTok's algorithm is intentionally created to be addictive," she said. Their own materials acknowledge that users can become hooked after less than half an hour on the app. Half an hour on the app, kids are addicted to a system that grabs their attention and distorts their attention and disrupts their ability to pay deep attention by flooding them with a bunch of nonsense in 15-second intervals that is distorting their and preventing their way to understand and interpret the world around them. It is crazy when you actually look at this. Hopefully you see the dangers here and look at this from an outside perspective. The report went on to say this: "These platforms are designed to hold our attention, but the opportunity cost is huge. The more time we spend scrolling, the less time we have for the activities that build real connection and meaning." Dr. Ian McGilchrist is kind of continuing on that meaning point, pointing out that not only is it distracting us from meaning, but it's preventing us from engaging the part of our brain from which we derive meaning, from which we understand how things have meaning and how they fit together in the hierarchy of order and the hierarchy of value systems. So not only are they capturing our attention and taking away our time to be able to pay deep attention and derive deeper meanings from things, but they're rewiring and retraining our brain to prevent that from even being able to happen, even if we had the time and attention to do so. So it's a huge, it's a huge problem. We're going to talk a lot more about that. But again, trying to get you, we're talking about all the doom and gloom stuff up front so we can level set on what all these problems are. But another problem that parents don't talk about much is the word radicalization. I'm choosing to use this in replacement of influence, because the influence, social media influence, is a big concern that parents have, and this speaks more to the content side of the issue, not necessarily the framework, although the two are certainly related. But what I want people to understand is, um, these platforms are designed to be radicalizers by nature. The definition of radicalization is the fundamental change from one thing to another. Influence is a little bit different. Influence is kind of nudging you toward making a decision. Radicalization is changing your paradigm by which you view everything. And that's the bigger issue that we're seeing. And you see this radicalization all over the place. That's why you see a phenomenon of teens all behaving in a different and net new way that they haven't experienced, haven't behaved in years past or generations past. It's because they've been radicalized around a platform, a way of engaging the world via this platform structure, as well as the content that they're being presented with. Now, doing some research into radicalization, it's interesting. The US government has a lot to say about this. There's a lot of reporting and work that the government does, primarily focused on political, religious, and cultural radicalization. They're primarily focused on countering extremism, religious extremism, and things that are going to contribute to political violence. But they basically have they've documented a basic structure that radicalization process. The basic structure of the radicalization process and their timeline for radicalization, they say that it takes about 6 months from initial exposure to a radical idea or a radical concept under constant influence of those who are trying to radicalize you. It takes about 6 months to become radicalized under that influence model. But the influence model matches what the Institute of Digital Media and Child Development said is has the same three criteria for what accelerates influence into radicalization. So the US government said there's a kind of this basic model and there's a basic timeline. The Institute of Digital Media and Child Development says yes, we recognize that model, but they've got the timeline totally off. The model, the main three accelerants of radicalization, again, moving from just subtle influence into a complete worldview change, are these three factors: time of exposure to the radical ideas or the radicalizer or the influencer, if you will, but time exposed to the radicalization process. Number two accelerant is peer involvement. So whether or not you have people you trust, know, and like around you who are also engaged in the same activities or the same process. And three is the platform that's used for exposure to facilitate the influence and the radicalization. Those three factors, same kind of structure as what the US government says, those three factors are the main accelerants towards radicalization, which some reports recently disclosed talk about how cultural radicalization these days is happening within just a few weeks based on these three accelerants, because these three are inherent in the social media platforms and inherent in the addiction of devices and all the social aspects along with that. So when we talk about social media being a place of cultural influence, social influence, it is worse than that. It is designed to be a platform and a mechanism for radicalization, both by how the US government defines radicalization, as well as the accelerants that are present to rapidly radicalize people into a completely different worldview. In fact, Rod Dreher talks about this in his book, Living in Wonder. There's an anecdotal story he shares, which makes this point very granular. He talks about a young family in Europe a husband and wife who gifted their teen a smartphone for her birthday. And I don't remember the reasons that he described in the book, but within just a matter of weeks of having that smartphone, that teen was able to access radicalizers or cultural influencers in the US through social media and had been radically transformed from a worldview perspective. And those parents were now wrestling to rescue their teen just by after giving them a smartphone and letting them use it in an unsupervised way for just a few weeks. That's how rapid this happens. You can lose your kids and their understanding of who they are and their worldview of value system entirely within just a few weeks of being exposed to these radicalization chambers, which are social media platforms. And that's what the previous reporting I just described, the addiction and attention crisis. They're basically pointing out that these platforms, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, etc., they're designed for this purpose. Now, originally they were not. Originally they were designed to collect people's attention, to create a place of gathering for social interaction, but they were monetized through ad revenue and ad generation. So they built a model around the individual and peer engagement, the time of exposure and peer involvement, they built a platform around that that also influenced people and inserted targeted ads and profile based ads to influence people into making buying decisions. And that's how the platforms originally generated revenue in order to deliver their services for free. That's how data monetization, or how service monetization works in the era of the internet. Any service that's available for free means the company providing the service is taking data and selling it to some third party and making money out of your experience and your interaction in some way. And these platforms were originally designed to do that with ads, but because of the form and the structure and the way that they work, that has rapidly deteriorated into chambers of radicalization, or I call it places of magic mirrors, like a hall of magic mirrors. So we need to understand, we need to recontext the problem of influence, social media influence, to understand it's not just about subtle influences working on our kids. These are chambers of total radicalization, and the radicalization process works very, very fast. So we talk about being addicted within, I believe the quote here was within, was it half an hour? I believe it was. Then kids can get addicted very quickly within the same day of first use. Once they're addicted, it only takes a few weeks for them to be radicalized into something completely other than who you raised them to be. Okay, so let's talk about the general effects of all this. What can we extrapolate are the main themes in terms of what technology use of our teams and the time that they're spending using technology and the platforms and structures of that technology? What is the effect, cumulative effect it's having? Well, we know that there's a physical impact. We've talked about that. There are things like eye strain and headaches and neck pain, posture and back problems, and then physical stagnation. These are kind of temporal things that we can address, right? These are not necessarily big problems. And I think a lot of times when we're talking about the health impact of screen time, this is kind of categorizing what screen time generically is going to have in terms of impact on your kids physically. Some temporary problems that can be probably addressed with other compensating controls or things like that, which is why I think screen time is kind of a misnomer. It's not necessarily where I think we need to focus our attention, although there is obviously physical impact associated with screen time. And that also speaks to patterns of health if kids are spending the majority of their day on devices and not actually doing things that are active in nature. That of course does set them up for patterns that are more difficult to overcome later on in life. But generally speaking, just the physical impact side of the house doesn't seem to be that big of a problem, although it can be on a case by case basis. The bigger problems are what's the rest of what's on this slide: mental health. So we know that adolescents who spend more than 5 hours per day on digital devices are 70% more likely to have suicidal thoughts or actions than those who spend less than 1 hour a day. Okay. And we know that teens are saying that they're spending at least 7 hours a day on screens. This statistic says 5 hours a day on digital devices leads to 70% increase in suicidal thoughts. Some of the other mental health issues that come along with that, of course, increased screen time and exposure to content and these different platforms also causes sleep deprivation issues and mood disorders, which can exaggerate mental health issues and make kids feel more depressed, more lethargic, more detached, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We also know that there's a cognitive decline effect from all of this. This is something that Dr. Ian McGilchrist has been pointing out, as well as the psychology sites that I mentioned before. But a lack of sleep and the form of this digital engagement world creates this effect that's being called brain rot, or also brain fog, which again contributes to the deterioration of our cognitive function, creates cognitive dysfunction, and reduced mental capacity. So as kids are engaged in all this digital world and the means and ways of all that engagement, they're actually hurting themselves cognitively. They're actually ruining their brains. And you can see that symptomatically through that phenomenon known as brain rot. Generally, kids are saying that they have a harder time remembering things, paying attention, staying awake. All of that is related to that cognitive decline. And of course, relationships are also being effective. Excessive screen time limits in-person interactions, just obviously speaking, but that does continue to create further issues with isolation and that sense of loneliness and overall that detachment, but also interacting with people in an artificial way online through the social media platforms and through social engagements and communications and through AI companionships. All of that creates a different, I should say, a distorted view on how real human relationships work. And so it actually we're actually training our kids to interact with each other in the wrong way, which prevents them from being able to interact with each other in the real way, in flesh and blood, which again exaggerates all this. Makes kids feel more awkward. more isolated, more unable to interact with each other in physical context. And so, of course, that affects their overall ability to build new relationships. Um, we're going to hear a little bit from Dr. John Vervaeke in a minute, but he's pointed out that he is observing this as a general trend amongst younger adults and kids that he's aware of in his life. They just simply are not able to make friendships anymore. Kids today seem to have lost the capacity for building meaningful relationships. And I think there's a direct correlation between that and this new digital way that we engage each other through our smartphones and through the online media. And then finally, attention and worldview. Okay, so this is really important. Smartphones, of course, are gateways that draw and maintain our attention into the digital world. And whatever it is we're paying attention to the most in that digital world is going to affect what we're thinking about, how we understand the world, and what is our understanding of what's going on in the world. And this, I think, correlates back to earlier what I mentioned, that trend of depression amongst teens. And they talk about the things that are happening in the greater world and stress about world and global events. That's because their worldview and their attention is being formed by these platforms and the nature of the content that they're constantly being fed in those platforms, which again contributes to this general set of effect of attention and worldview disorders or depression. And that's also hurting our kids and their ability to engage and break out of their isolation and engage in the world in meaningful ways, and even just understand that there are meaningful things in life to engage in. So these are kind of a summarization of the general effects that we can see from all this reporting and all these studies and all these metrics. There is certainly correlation between the use of technology today, specific technology and specific platforms, that is having widespread negative effects on our kids. Now, the parts of this that we're completely missing, that I want to add into the conversation, make sure that we're keeping our eyes open and aware of, is the internet security side of the house. I think this is what was mentioned in the original survey from the poll report, that number 3 item, or maybe been number 5, that talked about general internet safety or internet security and safety. I think this is a category that's not well understood. In all the reporting that I read, it was rarely mentioned. These sets of themes here that I'm going to talk to you about, they are certainly present. The good news is, and statistically speaking, young adults and kids under the age of 20, that age bracket is the least targeted or impacted by what I would call traditional internet security problems or threats. So that's kind of the good news. But the bad news is the adversary is actually shifting their focus towards the platforms that our kids are heavily using. So young adults, the younger generation that's continuing to use the internet and smartphones, they're shifting their engagement of the world through that media, through that platform. They're shifting towards digital currency. They're shifting towards digital financial payment and interactions. They're shifting towards messaging professionally, personally, kind of mixing that all together. And that's the place where adversaries are increasingly to shifting their tactics and focusing their attacks and exploits in the future, as well as human traffickers and other people who mean our kids great harm and are administering that harm via the internet. Our young adults and kids are moving, I would say, larger into their radar. And so I think there's greater risk ahead for them, especially in the future. But as of right now, they are kind of in an age bracket that is the least impacted by traditional cyber problems. But I think we need to make sure that they're aware of them, because some of these are very big threats to them today, although in smaller numbers. They can seem like they're not as big of a deal, but from an impact perspective, they can be very, very severe. So the 6 areas that I wanted to bring your attention to, also in addition to the mental health and physical health crisis, are these items. One is impersonation and extortion scams. These are where adversaries or malicious persons try to get you to act on their behalf or do something through some sort of extortion scheme, trying to trick you into something that you shouldn't do or wouldn't normally do. Number 2, predators and human traffickers. So this is a huge problem online. Predators lurk pretty much everywhere. We're going to dive into the details of this later on in the presentation when we talk about strategies. But predators, these are human predators, people who are seeking out victims on the internet and seeking where they're going to be, and then transferring that oftentimes into human trafficking. This includes sex trafficking. This includes trafficking of content. This includes luring and luring kids into like OnlyFans activity, all kinds of online bad activity that ensnares and enslaves them. We definitely need to keep an eye on this and know that it is a big, big problem, and also help prepare and protect our kids to address this issue. Number 3 on my list is privacy in the future. This is something that I think we neglect a lot, but understanding that what our kids are doing today, what we're how we are talking about our kids online and what our kids are doing today online will certainly have an impact on their overall privacy of their life, the integrity of their story as they get older, and it certainly can have implications on them in the future in a lot of ways. Especially, this is especially true with cancel culture, where if you post something online just based on your association with a place or a person or a theme can ruin your reputation amongst the larger community of the internet rage mob. And that can have very severe impact on your future story, your ability to access jobs or schools or all sorts of things. It's a big issue that I think our kids are just generally unaware of, and they're not being guarded and careful about what they're sharing and compromising their privacy in their interactions with the social spaces. And that's going to have big implications on them in the future. Number four, of course, is identity theft and fraud. Again, not probably a big issue for our kids today because their identities, even if they are stolen, they don't have a lot of financial resources to take advantage of. But if their identity information is being stolen now, then over time that information can be used, and we can be setting them up with for problems in the future already now based on how we are not properly safeguarding their data or teaching them to safeguard their data so that it can be exposed and can become a bigger problem for them in the near term or in the future for them. Number five, asset and account hijacking. So this is kind of linked to number one, impersonation attacks. But if we're not securing our assets, that's our devices and our computers, and also our accounts online, like our logins to social media and email services and everything else we do online, that puts those accounts and those assets at risk of being hijacked by somebody else, meaning somebody else can access it without our permission and can use our devices and our accounts, uh, impersonating us or just in other ways to their benefit. This is a big problem that I think we are not thinking about at all, and make sure we're teaching our kids how to keep their accounts locked down and the devices locked down, safe, and protected from that sort of issue. And then last is destructive attacks. Again, as our kids are increasingly engaged in the digital spaces and are transferring more and more of their life to the digital world, that puts their overall world at greater risk of destructive attacks. There's a lot of forms in which this takes place: data destruction, device destruction, property destruction. There's a lot of different forms of destructive attacks that are happening today that we need to make sure that we are aware of and safeguarding against. So, in addition to the mental health and the overall digital health issues we need to address for our kids, these are some of the more traditional cybersecurity related issues, although these do also bleed over to the physical world, and make sure we are training our kids and guarding them from those issues in particular. All right, drilling into predators and trafficking just for a minute, because I know this is a really big issue. It's important to know that nearly all cases of human trafficking today start with some form of online engagement. They start with building trust. The predators start with building trust. They want to engage our kids as if they are peers, or they're acting like some sort of sympathetic and interested adult to gain some form of trust and ongoing interaction with our kids so that they can trick our kids into some action or activity, or lure them to some other property, whether it's on the internet or physical property, to continue down whatever dark path they want to take our kids. Obviously, this oftentimes involves also extortion. There's a very big problem with teens and young adults sharing highly sensitive and personal information like pictures of themselves in compromising situations or in very intimate settings. Teens do this all the time, and I guess it's part of the dating scene now. People will share pictures that they shouldn't share. They'll take pictures that they shouldn't take of themselves, and they'll share them. And what a lot of predators and traffickers do, they'll pose to be a love interest or a friend or something of that nature. They'll get our kids to share that content with them, and then that gives them fuel or a means for extortion. They'll say, now pay me this ransom, or else I will post this picture on the internet, or I'll share it on social media to all of your friends, whatever the case would be. And actually, there's been several cases of suicide that have resulted from this, where kids were put in this situation. Well, they put themselves by sharing the images of themselves to a predator or to someone who means them harm. And then when they got that threat back from the predator, the extortionist, they decided to kill themselves rather than risk. They didn't have the money to pay the ransom in the first place, and they didn't want to risk the social embarrassment, so they ended up committing suicide. Very, very tragic. Another kind of statistic here to help you understand the scope of this problem: over 40% of sex trafficking victims say that they were first engaged online, which correlates back to nearly all cases of human trafficking starting with online engagement. But 80% of those cases were first engaged through social media. So when we're talking about our kids being on social media all the time, we need to know that there are predators and human traffickers who are lurking in that space, specifically seeking out new victims, trying to find any way that they can get to our kids, monitoring their accounts, monitoring their posts, seeing what they're discussing online, seeing what their interests are. And then these predators, they can actually create personified or impersonating accounts that match a lot of the styling and pictures and imagery and engagement of our teens, again, to build some sort of form of friendship, digital friendship, or some sort of digital trust, or some sort of digital collaboration that they can use to manipulate our kids and draw them off property. But we know that predators are lurking in online gaming for all ages. There are predators in kind of games built for adults, but there are also predators who play games that are designed for kids. I have a personal story connected to this, not my family, but someone I know well. Their daughter was playing an online game on their Kindle meant for kids. I forget what it was, but it had an online chat function where kids, other players, could communicate with each other socially in the game. And he found through a way of investigation that there were predators playing that child's game, talking to kids and trying to get those kids to build trust again, build confidence, and then meet up with them in person. So online gaming, all ages, is a big avenue for predators and trafficking. Social media, of course, online chat. So oftentimes what predators will try to do is, after they get that initial engagement, either via social media or gaming, they'll typically lure kids off of that platform to some other dedicated chat service like Discord or something else, or they'll get personal contact information to do direct messaging so that they can communicate sort of in private, one-on-one, and continue the grooming process. Oftentimes, also, predators will lure our kids to websites that contain material or images or themes that they want to uh, use to influence kids into trafficking. And then, of course, meeting, whether that's an invitation to meet up in person, or the predator or trafficker learning where the kid is and going to them, or coordinating meeting up in some sort of participatory event in the physical space that can lead to kidnapping. These are all outcomes that are possible via these predators and trafficking, which is an issue that was not really mentioned on any of the polls that I noticed, not in a significant factor, which really surprised me. This is a big issue that parents really need to make sure we are aware of and consider in overall digital health and safety and wellness of our kids. Again, 95% of our kids have smartphones, and something like at least half of them are online always in social media. They are just present where human traffickers and predators are looking to make victims. And so we got to know this. This is a big part of making sure that they are safe and secure. On the cybercrime front, just to get you some scope and scale of how big this problem is, this is traditional cybercrime, kind of traditional hacking and data theft, the stuff that I mentioned a few slides ago. Just to give you some scale, the underground economy. So this is where all the trade happens for stolen data, where adversaries and hackers buy and sell tools and resources and tradecraft, etc. That underground economy of stolen data and malicious tradecraft is estimated to be around 10 to 12 trillion dollars in total value, which, if the underground economy was its own economy proper, it would be the third largest economy of the world. It's roughly one third of the size of the US economy. So when we talk about cybercrime, we think about hacking and stolen data and identity theft and credit card fraud and all that. It is a massive, massive problem. And I think people dismiss it and don't think it's nearly as big of an issue as it really is. And it has a net effect on the entire normal economy. One, it is funding all kinds of evil and darkness in the underground world. Cybercrime doesn't just fuel additional cybercrime. Cybercrime is often a funding model for all kinds of other evil things that happen in the world. In fact, the primary funding vehicle of the North Korean government is cybercrime. So just so you know what these bad guys are doing, how they're using cybercrime to fuel all kinds of things: mafia, gangs, traffickers, sex trade, all kinds of evil things, weapons sales, drugs, all kinds of things are happening in this underground economy, and it's largely fueled through cybercrime. In terms of credit card fraud, which is probably the most common thing that you and I feel symptomatically of the underground economy, about 63% of US credit card holders have reported fraud in the last year. 62 million reports of credit card fraud were in the US in 2024. That's according to the US government. Cybercrime reporting statistics: $6 billion in total credit card fraud reported and that's about 25% of the US population in 2024 that reported some form of cybercrime to the tune of $6 billion. Now, remember, unfortunately, that's losses. Products were purchased, services were rendered. Somebody made a transaction that ended up with a product being lost or some sort of transaction actually happening. They can't all be stopped, even though you're not held liable most often for credit card fraud. Someone had to make up for that, which means our overall economy is suffering from this problem as well. Things are becoming more expensive because businesses have to deal with addressing the cybercrime problem and the losses that they're incurring through all this sort of fraud. Okay, identity theft is a really big problem still. It's one of those things that, again, we tend to ignore or not think too much about. But the FTC reported in 2024 there were 1 million new cases in the US of identity theft. So it's still out there, still happening. There were 2.6 million cases of fraud related to identity theft in 2024. That totaled $16 billion in damages in the US alone. So 1.1 million new cases of identities being stolen in 2024. So it's still happening, and 2.6 million cases of financial fraud related to ID theft. So the fraud is still happening at a larger scale than the new identities are being stolen, which means threat actors out there still have our identity information and are still waiting to use it for different forms of fraud over time. Something else we need to not only be aware about for ourselves, but certainly be aware of when we're talking about helping our kids build a healthy and well digital life in the digital age. Okay, in terms of overall trends of cybercrime, year over year, we are still in an acceleration of cybercrime on the internet. 33% increase in crime reports from 2023 to 2024. The 2024 to 2025 stats are out as well. They are also showing the same trend, and always acceleration curve of cybercrime expanding across the globe. What's interesting to note, and this relates back to what I mentioned earlier about how our young adults and kids are going to be increasingly targeted in the near future, cryptocurrency and direct transfer theft. So this is going to be payment transfers of via credit card and debit services. These are the biggest form of financial fraud in terms of what's increasing year over year. So our adversaries are turning towards cryptocurrency, digital currency, and online payment solutions, online fund transferring solutions, online wire transferring solutions to increase the scope and scale of their fraud, which means those generations that use those financial services are going to be increasingly at risk. But again, today, the demographic in terms of age range that is the least impacted by cybercrime is those under 20. But I do think all of these trends are going to continue to put them at greater risk. And now is the time to build for them the right habits, the right knowledge, the right skill sets to prevent them from becoming a victim in the future and the consequences of all of that. Okay, top methods of cybercrime. Just going to touch through this pretty quickly, but I do want to make sure we understand that the cybercrime world is highly professional. There are groups and gangs of criminals that work together. There are criminal enterprises that have actual structure and form. They recruit, they hire, they have benefits, they have vacation packages, they have 401k plans. There are professional organizations that are engaged in cybercrime, as well as nation states, espionage organizations and operations, and then just criminals at work on their own for contract. It is a very big problem, a very big world, but it is a world that is constantly engaged, and constantly looking for new victims, and constantly spreading their filth all over the internet. But primarily, what they're focused on is stealing credentials. They want usernames and passwords because they can directly access accounts and services with your username and password if they can get it. They are engaged heavily in extortion attacks. Ransom attacks are constantly rising. Basically, what they're trying to do is force you into an action that they want you to take by presenting you as some sort of compromising situation, some sort of threat, some sort of impact that you cannot get yourself out of unless you pay them. So it's a forced payment or forced behavior that they're trying to extort you into. Very, very common way that adversaries works. We need to make sure we are aware of our pressure points and sensitivities to know what we are putting at risk when we use online services and post our information on the internet. Impersonation and deception, these are huge scams. Obviously, if an adversary can exploit your trust by claiming to be someone that they're not, to be a provider or a friend or someone else, then they're going to use that as a way to trick you into doing something, giving up some information, giving them access, or getting you to click on something that you shouldn't. And still, the main kind of ways that they're conducting their activities, I would say, are threefold. malware, installing it on your device and your computer that facilitates a lot of back end crime. We'll talk about the details of that later on. Phishing. So these are going to be lures that they send to you. So, like a link via SMS or via email or an attachment or something like that, that they can use to get you to interact with and then lure you, draw you into some other action that they want you to take. And then, of course, data breaches. As data breaches happen at different organizations, our data is stolen, then the adversary has information that they can piece together and use against us. In addition to this, we'll talk about this later on, is really uh, the fact that adversaries are spreading weaponized content across the internet, across websites. So just as we are browsing websites, viewing ads, and being exposed to different networking scripts and website scripts that run in order to deliver us the services that we interact with, there's also exploit code that is being delivered to our computers in that way as well. So we need to make sure that we're safeguarding our assets as we engage in even legitimate internet services, because all of them can be weaponized to some extent. Okay, some of the other impacts from cybercrime. Malware has a lot of potential impacts, excuse me. It can be destructive in nature, it can steal data, it can steal pictures, it can be used to run applications on your computer that can slow it down. It can expose us to other forms of extortion or attacks because it redirects our computer or gives instructions to do other things. All kinds of problems are bundled up in malware. It is still a big problem we need to focus on and build remediation for, and make sure our kids understand that this is an issue. In terms of the economy, I mentioned this before, but banks are losing money, which means they are going to offer lower interest rates on things like CDs and other investments that you can make through your bank, because they need to make up their money some other way. And they're also continually issuing higher fees for banking services. Services that used to be free are now having some nominal charge associated with them. And those nominal charges are increasing over time if you're paying attention. You probably noticed this. This is largely because banks have to overcome cybercrime and fraud and all the issues that are related to them losing money through business theft or data theft. In addition to that, businesses that are having to counter these issues are also having to incorporate that into their cost of operating, which translates to higher costs for goods and services for all of us. But bringing this down to the personal costs of cybercrime, this really varies on a per person basis depending on the nature of the crime and the adversary. But things like ransom payments or extortion payments, they can range from a couple $100s to thousands of dollars depending on the adversary, depending on the nature of the exposure, etc. Of course, stolen or transferred money that is taken from your account directly through a payment processing service or by logging into your bank account and making a wire transfer, that money is just instantly gone. And the personal cost depends on how much money you have. But that can be a very painful thing to discover one day. You log into your account and your money is gone, or you had a fraudulent payment or fraudulent transaction or an impersonation transaction, and you willfully transferred your money to someone who was a fraudster. That's also a big problem. But if you do have some form of destructive malware on your computer, having to replace a device can be very expensive, or paying for professional IT services or legal fees to overcome some sort of major problem, that can get very expensive very quickly, again, depending on the nature of the cybercrime. But also, in terms of if our data and our identity is stolen and is used against us in the future, that can cause us to be denied access to things that we should have rightful access to. It can result in different sorts of reputational damages on the internet. If our accounts have been compromised and exposed, people can distance themselves from us, or employers might distance themselves from us. There can be impacts to potential trust and integrity and our overall character and reputation based on misuse of our accounts by threat actors or people who are impersonating us. And then, of course, if we are rightfully allowed a service and our identity is used by someone else to access that service, then that means the service that we should normally be able to leverage and benefit from will be unavailable to us. This often happens with government services and identity fraud and identity theft, where someone posing to be us will go to a government entity and get the benefit without us actually knowing. And then when we go to get that benefit, we'll be informed that it's already been taken because someone else using our identity has already accessed it or using it. So these are some of the other impacts that are associated with cybercrime that, again, I think are completely off the radar of a lot of parents. And I want to draw your attention to make sure that we address these as well. Okay, now in terms of what solutions are being marketed to parents, what are you being told are the ways to address this? I did a bit of research and I actually wrote a few reviews on how to lock down and leverage security features that are inherent on the Apple iPhone as well as the Android platform. And I looked at two of the top third-party solutions that are offered for smartphones, tablets, and computers, so that parents can solve the various problems that teens and kids face online today through their device. Bark and Custodio are the name of those two platforms. But took a look at all those hardware solutions from Apple, software solutions from Android, software solutions from Bark and Custodio to protect your kids online. And they tend to focus on four key themes. They tend to focus on controlling screen time, making sure your kids have limited access and use of their devices and online resources. They want to provide parents with the ability to track their kids' location. This is a really big theme of all of the providers. Knowing where your device is at all times, I think, speaks to that concern that we mentioned earlier on about violence and school violence in particular. But that seems to be a big theme that these solutions want to empower parents to address. Monitoring communication, so monitoring social media posts, monitoring chat, monitoring SMS messaging on the device or the laptop itself seems to be a big thing that these providers are concerned about. And then doing their best to block use of apps on devices, and then block access to content online and participation in different online forums is the other big area that these different solutions focus on. So controlling screen time, knowing where your kids are, monitoring their communications and who they're communicating with, and then managing their content and their online experience seems to be what the industry and what the marketed solutions to parents are focused on, which begs the questions. Given all that I've shared with you so far about the nature of the problem, the depth of the problem, and some of the things that we're overlooking and aren't incorporating into the overall cyber digital health, cybersecurity problem set, begs the question, do we have the right solutions? Are the things that we're being presented with, the answers we're being presented with through the providers and through schools and through the institutions that are trying to help us, are we being presented with the right tools to address this problem? Is this really just about screen time, which seems to be one of the big concerns that a lot of parents have? They seem to think if they just limit screen time, then they can manage all these other problems. Or another approach is controlling content. Parents seem to think that I can give my kid a device, they can have use of it on demand at will. As long as I control the content that they're trying to access, then they should be okay. Is that sufficient enough to solve these problems? Another type of solutions that or parenting style that I've run into is the belief that we can redeem all these experiences, that kids can participate in all these things in a healthy way, as long as we guide them towards the right experience. As long as we craft the right overall experience, then technology isn't really a problem. Screen time isn't really a problem. Content's not really a problem, so long as we are guiding them to the right conclusions and the right outcomes. And then finally, there's a big perception amongst people that cybercrime is really just a corporate problem. It's really a problem of business and in big institutions and something for our employers to worry about, but not really for us to worry about. Are all these questions true? What's the answer to all these questions? Well, in my opinion, the answer is no. We're going to talk through all of this to great length and extent for the rest of this presentation. I think the answers are deeper than this because I think the problems are deeper than this. We're missing some of the fundamental understanding of what is driving these problems. And so in order to be able to address them, we really do need to rethink what the problems are, get into the deeper issues, fix some of the core problems, which are things like attention, losing the ability to understand the purpose and meaning of things, and taking an active role in participating in all of life in different ways, protecting our property and ourselves in a much more active way. I think if we're going to build the right approach, the right solutions to these problems, we need to soak in the problems a bit more and understand what's really going on. Okay, so that's what we're going to do next. We're going to take a deeper dive into these issues, explore them at a greater extent, listen to some deeper thinkers and how they think we should be framing up these problems. And then from those voices, we're going to start building some first principles. We're going to start setting a set of priorities, a set of foundational principles. They're going to guide us to the right solutions and the right strategies in order to implement those in our day to day. But what I want to do first is spend some time with you rethinking these things, getting a little bit deeper, exploring the topics at greater length, and then come up with just some strong foundational principles. We're going to set this line in the sand. This is a truth. And we're going to build upon that as we go and incorporate and explore strategies down the road. All right, with that, we're going to take a break. I thank you very much for your attention so far in this presentation. This is our seminar for digital health and cybersecurity for parents. Section number one is done. We've framed up the problem. We'll take a break, and when we regather, we will talk about rethinking the issues and establishing some of those first principles. Thank you very much. I'll be with you shortly.